Hello, everyone. Welcome to this training. We are doing an introduction to motivational interviewing. My name is Cade Arnick. I am a motivational interviewing trainer. I'm a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. I've been working with MI since 2019. You may notice my associate, Fletcher Herring. He'll be in the chat. Kind of helping answer any technical questions that come up and then getting people into breakout rooms when we get to exercises. And then just a couple notes. I'll come back to this throughout the training as well, but MI is a specific tool among many tools. And we are all, I'm sure, coming from a variety of disciplines. And so as we're going through this training, take what you can and leave the rest. Some things might be highly applicable to the population, the settings you're working with, and some things may not. So as we go through it, just be thinking about how this can apply to your work and maybe what doesn't. We'll be doing some exercises throughout the training, and in order so you can keep the rules for the exercises, they're all kept in this Google document. And so I'm going to post that in the chat. And then just kind of going over what our goals for today are going to be. This is an introductory course. We're going to go over the concepts and structures of motivational interviewing with a specific focus on the spirit of MI and also the technical and relational aspects. From there, I don't want this to just be a training where you learn about a little bit about MI and then it just kind of isn't something you use again. I want to talk about how we can start to practice MI, and then also what are next steps to go from here? How can you kind of continue learning this and continue practicing this? What have you already heard about motivational interviewing? I'm curious if a couple people could talk about that. All right. I will take that as that this is kind of a pretty new idea to everyone. So yeah, let's start talking about what is motivational interviewing. And I'm going to offer a few definitions as we go through, but first, just to say, MI is a style of communication. It's collaborative, goal-oriented, with a particular attention to the language of change. It's designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. And that comes from Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick, the founders of motivational interviewing. And what's important to note is that MI is not an intervention per se. We like to think of it as more, again, as this style of communication, a way of being, and something that can be used really effectively in conjunction with other interventions. And MI as a style of communication is a guiding style. That means it sits between following, good listening, and directing, giving information and advice. And it's something that's designed to empower people to change by drawing out their own meaning and importance and capacity for change. And we also think of MI as being based on a respectful and curious way of being with people that facilitates the natural process of change and honors client autonomy. And what's important to note about MI is that it does require the clinician or provider to engage with the client as an equal partner and refrain from any unsolicited advice, confronting, instructing, directing, or warning. It is not a way to get people to change or a set of techniques to impose on the conversation. It's something that takes time, practice, and requires self-awareness and discipline from the clinician. And so that's to say, MI is not a one-size-fits-all strategy. It is something that we want to use in very specific circumstances with specific clients, and there may be many times where it could be not helpful to use MI or kind of against what your needs in that conversation are. And so again, as we're going through this, how does MI apply to really be thinking about how this applies to the populations you're working with, the type of environment you're in, and what can you take and what do you need to leave behind as we're going through it? And so that all kind of begs the question, when do we use MI? And so MI is most effective when ambivalence is high and people are stuck in mixed feelings about change, when confidence is low, where people are doubting their abilities to change, and where desire is low and people are uncertain about whether they want to make a change, and finally, when importance is low and the benefits of change and disadvantages of the current situation are unclear. And one thing that I really like to think about that helps me orient how I work with MI is wearing multiple hats. Sometimes we have our MI hat on and we are present in MI, and sometimes we need to wear a different hat. What is applicable, what is not, and how can we change between them in the middle of a conversation are all things we'll talk about moving forwards. And so what MI is really centered around are these relational skills. And why should we care about relational skills? Well, we know that high empathy promotes client change and low empathy can do the opposite. There are several meta-analyses that have found non-significant differences between the outcomes of different therapies. And as we delve deeper into that, if there's no differences between specific modalities, what has come to the surface is that provider empathy is what has a major determinant in client success. And so, yeah, we have found that high empathy counselors appear to have higher behavior change success rates. And with this empathy being one of the largest determinants of client outcomes, the counselor provides the treatment. And so we're really going to place an emphasis on empathetic listening skills that are, and as we talk about, that are based in these evidence-based practices. And finally, we have found that low empathy and confrontational approaches have been associated with higher dropout and less client change. And so all this is to say that as humans, we are beings that want to be loved, accepted, heard, cared about, felt worthy of. And this is one of the areas that we can start by making a difference in the populations we're working with, just engaging these relational skills and coming and working with clients in that capacity. And so I want to turn it back to everyone. What are people's thoughts about all this? I'm seeing some thumbs up come into the chat. Sounds like large approval of the need for relational skills. So that brings us back to the question, what is motivational interviewing? And here I'm going to introduce some definitions that are a bit more specific than kind of that large flowy definition I gave before. MI is a particular conversation about a specific change. MI is client-centered, empathetic partnership, honors autonomy, non-expert recipient, and avoids roadblocks. And MI is evocative, that it seeks to call forth the person's own motivation and commitment. And so this can be broken down into three essential elements. MI has a focus, it has a relational aspect, and it has a technical aspect. And this is kind of how we're going to frame the rest of this training. We're going to talk about the focus of MI, we're going to talk about the relational aspects of MI, and we're going to talk about the technical aspects. So starting with all that, the focus of MI is on ambivalence. Ambivalence is a common problem that we all face, and ambivalence normally precedes a client change. And the goal of MI is to resolve ambivalence. And when I say ambivalence, I mean that people see reasons why they should make a change and reasons why they should stay the same or maintain the status quo. And this comes up in a variety of situations, variety of circumstances. Addiction is a really common area where we see a lot of ambivalence. This was the context in which motivational interviewing was actually designed. But anywhere that there is ambivalence, we can use MI to try and resolve that ambivalence. And so if we're not listening to it, what happens when we are engaging with ambivalence? If we're listening to an ambivalent person or you confront them, they tend to take up the other side of the argument and disengage. So if we come at someone presenting them with all the reasons why they might want to make a change, they're going to move away from us. And I think a really easy example of this is if you run into a friend, say after work, you're talking to them, and you say, "What's going on tonight?" And they say, "Oh, I just got to work. I'm really tired, but I'm trying to go to the gym. I'm trying to stay healthy." If you say to them, "Oh, you should go to the gym, you need to keep on this," they see both sides of this argument. And now the only thing they're left with is to say, but I'm so tired. I think it's just better if I go home tonight. And so that's kind of where the problem with ambivalence comes in, is that we can see very often as an outsider what may be the correct thing to do, what might be better. But when you are in ambivalence and you're seeing reasons you can make a change and reasons you should not make a change, both those are equally valid in your mind. And it's not as simple as being persuaded to one or the other. It's that there needs to be a resolution. And MI can help us do that. And when we do come at people with this persuasive approach, "Oh, you should make this change. I think you should do this," very teaching, very directive, people can often feel invalidated. They can resist, they can withdraw. There's some more specific emotion words, but some that stand out to me are not heard. They can feel defensive or oppositional, inattentive. They might avoid or leave in that conversation or not return. And so when we're working with, in clinical populations, being aware of this, how we're coming at people with our language can, affect how they are engaging us in that conversation. And we sometimes run the risk of having people disengage from us if we're not hearing what they're saying. And so part of ambivalence is that as we resolve it, as we voice our reasons for change, we gradually become more committed to that change. There's a good body of research that shows as we speak change, we become more likely to commit to it. And so for us, that's how can we tip the scale towards reasons for change? How can we bring forth people's own motivations to change? So it becomes not us telling people to change, but people talking themselves into change. And yeah, as providers in these situations working with people in ambivalence, we have a strong influence on how we tip the balance of this scale. We know that confronting clients can lead to defensiveness, and that defensiveness predicts a lack of behavior change. And so our goal is how can we bend the scale towards change using MI consistent skills. And so when we engage in, and we'll get into this in a second, but when we engage in these MI consistent skills, in these good relational skills, people tend to feel affirmed, accepted. They might feel a lot more open. They feel heard and respected. They talk more. They are engaged more in the process. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we'll be talking about today is how can we use MI as a tool to engage in these good relational skills. And it kind of starts with a kind of a frame shift in how we communicate with people. So we all have this righting reflex. We want to help people. We want to do the right thing. And when we are confronted with ambivalence as an outsider, we have the tendency to push people towards the right decision because we do not have ambivalence. We see what is correct. And this is a totally normal human response. This is the way that we communicate with our friends, with our family. And so it's something that is a lot of people are very used to. It's very common. And so when we start talking about MI and these more patient-centered communication skills, we kind of have to shift that framework. We were entering this space not as a friend, not as a family member, and we need to be aware that we have this righting reflex. And for those of you who've experienced MI, you know that when you're talking to someone, you have these feelings come up where, oh, I know what the right thing to do is. I need to tell someone I know how to solve this issue. And so when we're doing MI, we really want to be aware of this when this reflex comes up and how we can navigate that. And the way we navigate that is with core communication skills. The best way to develop a trusting relationship that gives patients opportunities to authentically engage and explore conversations of change is to avoid roadblocks of communication and to use core communication skills. And before we explore that, I want to show a video.
I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail out.
See, you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't!
So yeah, what did people think of that video?
It was actually really funny.
Okay. So
there was so much truth to it. Yeah, there was so much truth to it.
It hit the nail on the head.
yes.
That's great.
Yeah, I think this video, I think everyone's noticing that this is a very good kind of microcosm of how people can feel invalidated in a conversation and how just a quick moment of helping someone feel heard can go a long way. Any other thoughts before we move on? Great.
I just love how it showed that he was struggling. you know, because he wanted to get the message across, but he also understood how it offended her. So him struggling with deciding which route to take.
Yeah, yeah, he could see what the issue was. He could see that she was struggling and he wanted to help, but telling her what the problem wasn't actually solving the issue. And so, yeah, kind of going from that, I want to talk about some of these roadblocks that can come up in communication. These are developed by Thomas Gordon, and I don't want to like read them word for word, but generally there's 12 roadblocks, and they kind of follow these: ordering, directing, commanding, things like you have to get some medication, warning or threatening people. This is the last time you're gonna get away with that. Giving advice, making suggestions, providing solutions. Things like what I would do is, have you tried this? Persuading with logic, arguing, lecturing, judging, criticizing, directing, blaming. It's your own fault. I can't believe you didn't know better. Even agreeing, approving, praising. You are absolutely right. That's what I would do. Things like shaming, ridiculing, name calling. You should be ashamed of yourself. Interpreting or analyzing. You don't really mean that. Questioning or probing. Doesn't that upset you? Withdrawing, distracting. Can we talk about this some other time? Moralizing. You shouldn't really smoke. It's bad for you. Reassuring, sympathizing. Don't worry, everything will be all right. And so it's important to bring these up because we need to remember when we're doing MI that things like this can be roadblocks. But again, I also want to be clear that sometimes we may be in roles where we have to do these things. And so it's about finding that balance of when am I wearing my MI hat and when am I wearing the other hat that my roles require of me. In a medical setting, you might have to be directive. You might have to tell someone what to do. You have to be the expert in the room. And so we're going to talk a little bit more in a couple minutes about how we can use MI to build engagement so that when we do sometimes have to step into some of these roadblocks or into our other roles, we can still maintain a productive conversation. So we're going to jump into our first exercise now. And if anyone missed it, I did. So all these instructions are in a Google Doc in the chat. If anyone needs, I can post it in the chat again. But we're going to send you to breakout rooms. You will enter, let's see how many people, there's 160 people. So there will be 3 and 4 of you in a room. Won't be partners. One of you figure out amongst yourselves who's going to be the speaker, who's going to be the listener, and then everyone else is going to be observers for this conversation. If you're the speaker, identify a change you are considering, something you're thinking about changing in your life, but you have not definitely decided. It should be something you feel 2 ways about. It might be a change that is good for you or something that you've been putting off. And explain to the listener about this change. And again, please only talk about something you're comfortable sharing. Something that can be talked about in a 5-minute conversation. We don't want anyone to explore, deep secrets. And if you're the listener, your task is going to be to try as hard as you can to convince and persuade the speaker to make the change that they are considering. Tell them why it's a good idea to make the change, warn them what might happen if they don't make the change, and tell them about how maybe you've made a change. And if you start meeting resistance, try more emphatically to persuade the person. And so we're going to do that for 5 minutes. And just because breakout rooms can be a little tricky, after that 5 minutes, you're going to pause and you're going to try it another way. And you're going to have the same conversation you just had, but this time you're not going to try to persuade or fix anything. You're not going to offer any advice. Instead, you're going to ask these 4 questions. And again, all of this is in that Google document. If anyone is having trouble accessing that, let me know and we will send it again. But before we send everyone to breakout rooms, are there any questions about either part of this exercise? Great. So we'll send you to breakout rooms, and at 5 minutes, I will send a message to switch styles of conversation, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So yeah, where people will be filtering back in over the next couple of minutes, and then we'll start once everyone's back in. We'll talk about that experience. Okay, it looks like everyone is rejoining us. So stepping back into that first style of conversation we had, the persuasive one, how was that if you were the speaker? How was that experience for you?
Well, I think it was really interesting. My group, we did a good job. We were trying to figure it out and try to help each other. I was the speaker, so I shared a change that I'm considering, and my listeners did, the by any means necessary try to convince me. And it was interesting because they're like, "Oh, go for it," and I'm like, "Ooh, but,"
Yeah.
and it's not what you were talking about. Yeah. So it really illustrated well, some of the roadblocks.
Yeah. Any other speaker experiences in similar, different to that? Thank you, Nikki.
Our group went real well. Well, it was just two of us. The third one, we couldn't get any response. So I was the speaker, and I think our little experiment went pretty well. We went into the next following up the questions, so that was helpful as well. So
yeah. And how did it feel switching from kind of the persuasive style to those questions? Did that change how you responded to this the listener?
Yeah, it made me think about a lot more of setting goals and what I need to do.
Yeah.
That's what I shared. So I was given some good feedback too as well.
Yeah. So yeah, the questions help generate some feedback.
Right.
And for the listeners, what was it like being persuasive and then switching to these questions?
I believe, with our own exercise, it gave the person who was asked the questions the ability to get involved and make those decisions, those choices by themselves.
Yeah. So yeah, there was kind of a change. It went back more to the speaker. It wasn't no longer you were trying to convince them. Kind of moving along. Timothy, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, to kind of capitalize on what Deb was saying, there was two of us, and the first couple of minutes we're trying to find our way in the dark. But my colleague who I was doing this with, we actually even got to the point of utilizing oars. And I think what she indicated that she wanted to quit. My response to her was totally and completely non-judgmental, and I always kept my questions open-ended. And it's like, tell me more. When does this happen? What happens when your behavior is observed by family and other ones? I tried to really make a conscious effort to stay away from closed questions, and it's a fun exercise.
Yeah, so you're already engaging in some of those skills and finding that it's hard sometimes to be persuasive, that it feels better to, kind of naturally engage with someone. And so I'll just ask one more question before we move on. What would people rather see as a provider, the persuader style or this more am I consistent practitioner style?
Definitely the MI. I felt like because I was the speaker, I felt like the listeners were doing a really good job at like empowering me.
Yeah.
And so I feel as, speakers to feel empowered, it just gives the patients more of a, I can do this. I can, I can do this by myself, or I came up with these ideas. So it kind of makes them feel a little better about themselves.
Yeah, you really felt that agency as it came from yourself. I think that's all really great, and I think that'll help us transition nicely into kind of our next topic, which getting into the aspect of MI, really talking about how this style of communication can build empathy and collaborative communication. And so that all starts with the spirit of MI. And so this is where MI fits in as a tool. In all the various roles we may hold, if we are wanting to engage in MI, we need to engage in the spirit of MI. So as a couple of people pointed out, and we'll get into this later, there are these common skills we use, these oars, that are not invented by MI, that exist across disciplines. But when we are engaging in the spirit, that is when we are doing MI. And so this spirit encompasses 4 aspects. Partnership, this is not, we're not coming to the MI conversations as an expert. We are coming alongside the client. We are sharing kind of that decision-making, sharing expertise. The clients are the experts on themselves, after all. MI is evocative. We are eliciting versus instilling. We're trying to bring forth people's own motivations rather than instilling motivation in them. MI is compassionate. We're coming at a place of, as someone said previously, non-judgmental openness, really hearing and caring for the people we're talking to. And then acceptance, really valuing the absolute worth of the client and being accurate in our empathy. It's not enough to just be empathetic, but to understand where the client is coming from and what they're going through. The founder of motivational interviewing, Bill Miller, likes to think of this spirit as a way of being. This is something that we can take with us into the world that doesn't just have to exist in with the client. And I think that's a really nice way to think about practicing MI, as we're going through our daily lives, like, oh, how can I embody the spirit more? Or in this conversation, what aspect of myself did I not, of the spirit, did I feel myself not embodying? And so just as we're moving through the world, I think thinking of this as a way of being is a good way to practice for when we move into these conversations with clients or patients. But at the same time, again, MI is a very specific hat. There may be many situations where we cannot encompass the spirit of MI, where we may need to take on the expert role, or we may need to give specific information that we don't have time to bring forth motivation, that we have to tell people what to do. And that's all a normal part of the job. And so just know when we have to step into that role, we are no longer doing MI, but that's okay, because we have built this engagement and we can step back into it when we need. And to get us thinking a bit more about the spirit, I want to do another exercise, another exercise as a group. I'd like everyone to imagine 2 mentors you may have had in your life. One person who has had a positive impact on you and another person who has had a negative impact on you. Just spend a couple minutes thinking about that and think about words that you're associating with each person. And so I'll give everyone a couple minutes, and then when we come back, we will kind of put those on this little board here. So yeah, coming back into it. If people still need a couple seconds to think, that's fine. But I just want to hear from a few people. Oops. Just want to hear from a few people. When you think of a positive mentor you may have had in your life, what are some words that you associate with that mentor?
I can think of a couple of words.
Yeah.
I wrote down supportive, respectful, kind for the positive traits.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down non-judgmental.
Yes.
And
Caring.
Caring. Yeah. 1 or 2 more words if anyone has them.
Empowerment.
Empowerment. Yeah, and I see that it's hard for me to see the chat, but I do see that a lot of people are posting in there.
Accepting.
Accepting. Yeah, those are all some really great words. So, and then switching, God.
I'd rather add, encouraged me to do the hard work that I needed to do.
Yeah, so someone who really, they pushed you.
Yes.
And then kind of switching to this negative mentor, someone who had kind of this negative impact on you. What are some words you would associate with that person?
Resentment.
There's a couple of people spoke at once. Can you say that again, Yvonne?
Resentment.
Resentment. Yes.
Spiteful.
Spiteful.
Reactive.
Reactive. Yes.
Cockiness.
How do you spell cocky?
Controlling.
Controlling.
Judgmental. Judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Mean.
Greedy.
Mean, greedy. Yeah, these are some great words. And so now, starting with the positive mentor, where can we place some of these words we generated in the spirit of MI? Where might supportive go? This is
Acceptance.
acceptance. This is
A
a little
partnership.
Partnership.
Partnership. Yeah. How about respectful?
Vocation.
Acceptance.
Acceptance, evocation. Just because
Compassion.
the limits of
Compassion.
the limits of my screen that I'm working with, I'm not going to place these, but can you go down the list? It sounds like these words are fitting in multiple areas. How about non-judgmental? Where might that fit in?
Acceptance.
Acceptance,
Yes.
Acceptance.
yeah. Then how about caring?
Caring. Compassion.
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 Yeah. Yeah, and so I think we're starting to see, even though unfortunately struggling to get them all up on the board, there's the other screen I'm looking at is like halfway behind me. How about these words that we've associated with the negative mentor? Do any of these words fit into these categories? Partnership?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Exactly. And so as we're going through our lives, as we're working with clients, I think this is a really good thing to come back to remember, how do we want to be? What are the ways we want to be with the client? And when do we recognize that we might be struggling with one of these areas? And how can we think about making these changes in our lives? And so the spirit of MI, this is something that it encompasses everything else we'll be talking about today. And so we'll be coming back to this idea a few times. And just this is something that we're constantly cultivating within ourselves. And so moving forwards, we're going to start getting into the 4 processes of MI. MI has 4 separate parts: engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. We'll start by talking about engaging. This is the relational piece of MI. This is the process of establishing mutually trusting and respectful helping relationships. And the spirit of engagement starts before we ever meet the client. It is embedded in how we see our role in working with them. And then and again, this is an ongoing process and maintaining direction. And for a therapeutic alliance to be developed and sustained, I'm skipping ahead, apologies. Yeah, and so what's interesting about the 4 processes of MI is I have them arranged in this kind of staircase orientation because we never stop a process. When we move from engaging to focusing, we don't stop engaging. We're building on that engagement by focusing.
Right.
Same thing when we move to evocation. We're not stopping, we're not changing focus, we're not stopping the engagement we've built. It's all piling on top of one another. And then the spirit helps us maintain that the way throughout. And then we'll also talk about how these are facilitated throughout as well. And so first I'd like to talk about this research experiment supporting efficacy. So this experiment looked at 3 alcoholism treatment programs. A subset of clients with particularly high alcoholism recovery potential, or HARP, were identified. Counselors in these programs were told who these HARP patients were, and then counselors rated all the patients they saw following treatment, both HARP and non-HARP, and measured client behavior following treatment. And counselors rated these HARP patients to be more motivated for counseling, more punctual in meeting appointments, higher in self-control, neater and more attractive, more cooperative, trying harder to stay sober, and showing better in recovery. These clients also had higher rates of abstinence, longer spans of abstinence, fewer slips, and more employment. So I'm curious, what happened here? Any guesses about what happened in this study?
Just the support was able to empower the clients or the patients.
Yeah. So these HARP patients seem like they had a lot of support. Yeah, and that kind of gets into what this study was looking at. These HARPS clients were selected at random from among clients in each treatment program. So the HARP patients versus the non-HARP patients did not differ in any meaningful way other on prior treatment history or severity of alcohol use. So it was really just when the providers, the counselors, thought that these clients would do better, they treated them as that they would do better. They treated them with more efficacy. And so this is similar, if any of you have heard of the growers study, where children in schools were identified as growers and they did better in tests, even though they were just decided as random. How the teachers engaged with them made them do better than other students. And in a similar vein, research has showed that this research study looked at therapist empathy and client outcomes. Therapists were rated on their empathy, and therapists who scored higher empathy had better client outcomes, while therapists with lower empathy had worse client outcomes. And this result really showed us that low therapist empathy can actually be toxic to client outcomes. I think I heard someone say something. Is there a comment? If not, that's it. And yeah, and so this, as we're getting into this engagement portion of MI, these are the things that we really want to be keeping in mind. How we can provide efficacy for our clients, how we can be empathetic with them. And I'd like to play another short video. Hopefully this one has less audio issues. Let me make sure I'm still sharing audio. Yes. I mean, there's.
I have
a question.
Yeah, well, sort of, no, not a question, but I just my experience, I've noticed that someone who's gone through a recovery and is a counselor, they really like to poke at that nail, you know, and make them realize what they're doing. I've seen that a lot of times. So I don't know how productive that is, but it was a lot of confrontation in that sense. Sometimes that becomes, I think, an issue.
Yeah, having that confrontational aspect sometimes make it hard to have a productive conversation.
Right.
Yeah, and so yeah, kind of getting into that, when things get hard, remembering how we can be empathetic. And this video kind of will talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and I think it just illustrates it in a really nice way. Again, let me know if there are any issues with hearing this, or if it's going to play. Is that showing up? Oh,
yes.
Yep.
It has updated. Great. You guys can.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yes.
So yes, as I transition back to the slides, what are some thoughts on that video?
Renee Brown is awesome.
Yes, she is.
Yes, she is.
At least you have a video to show.
Right.
You know, I never considered that the silver lining was anti-empathy. I think I've used it several times, and I'm more aware of that now. Actually, that was enlightening.
Yeah, you know, again, these are all very natural responses. You know, we want to try, and it goes back to that writing reflex. We want to make it better, you know, when people are faced with something difficult. And the gut reaction we have may not always be the best way to do that.
I think
when somebody uses, go ahead. It's okay.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, I put it in the chat, but I think to me, the power of empathy is it allows us to be emotionally honest with people in a safe, shared space.
Yeah. Yeah, it creates that connection. It creates safety. And importantly, that helps us build engagement, especially when we're being accurate in our empathy. You know, we're showing that we understand what people are going through, not just trying to fix it. And then the other comment.
At least to me is not a natural response to say, at least you can get pregnant. That's almost hurtful, I think. And I don't think most people have a natural, prevalence to be hurtful. So I don't think at least is usually a natural response.
Yeah, no, I think people aren't going out of their way to be hurtful.
Right.
And I think that's a really good point. And again, kind of going back to that, expand a little bit more. Sometimes when we respond, we just want to make things right. And that may not come out as an at least statement. It could be many other statements, but sometimes we engage in being sympathetic to people in regards to being empathetic to people. And so how we cultivate within ourselves to be more naturally empathetic is really important. Saria?
I feel like using the word at least just conveys jealousy and spite. So going off of what the previous person just stated, it does not feel like a natural human response. It feels like a response from someone who is jealous or spiteful.
Yeah.
I see two more people raise their hands. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of thoughts about this. I'm curious, let's keep hearing what people are saying. We'll probably do 2 or 3 more responses and then I have to move on now.
Oh, no, I was just going to say real quick, I've always struggled with understanding the difference sometimes between like empathy and sympathy, but I liked on this video how it kind of shared the empathy part is like feeling what someone else is feeling versus feeling bad for that someone's feeling.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that
the process. Yeah, it's the process of coming alongside someone. And then, yeah, I see it's hard to see what order people have raised their hands in, but if one more person wants to chime in, that would be really great.
I was just going to say real quick that I think sometimes people minimize things and they don't mean to. And it does sometimes come across as at least, or, well, that's not that bad, but they're really just trying to force you to quote unquote see the bright side. But honestly, I think it's because they're just uncomfortable hearing, like they're not comfortable with your feeling, you know, so they're trying to force the conversation into what they think is a positive light, and it comes across, they say at least, or that's not so bad, but it just comes across as dismissive or minimizing. It's like, obviously you're not hearing what I'm trying to tell you.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the goal is, you know, when we're faced with these emotions, we can sometimes definitely feel uncomfortable and have this urge to try and make it right, make it better. And so working with clients, working with people, how can we come alongside them and not actually engage in those negative emotions? And that's kind of the skills we'll start talking about. And so we mentioned this previously, a couple of people have brought them up in their comments, but we're going to start talking about our oars. What are our tools in the conversation? How do we start building engagement and maintaining it throughout the session? And how do we start to evoke change? And so if we view our conversation of MI as a boat, our oars are what keep us going. And so these are common tools of therapy. They are not unique to motivational interviewing, but we engage with them within that spirit of MI is when it becomes MI. And so the main thing to remember is that we are not trying to persuade people. We are trying to use our oars to build engagement and to bring forth change. And so our oars are open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And before we start getting into it, we've been going for about an hour now, so just want to give people the opportunity to stretch, get some water if you need, and we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll get going again at 10:40. Okay, so it's just about 10:40. Some people might be filtering back in. We'll just give it a couple more seconds. But yeah, hopefully everyone got a chance to get some water, get a stretch, and we shall carry on. So going through our oars, again, these things that keep us moving in the conversation of MI. Let's start with going through each one. And so there we go. So we'll start with open-ended questions. What are open-ended questions? Seem like a very simple question, and it is. They're questions that can't be answered with yes or no. And why are these important? So open-ended questions allow patients to create impetus for forward movement, and they're really good information gathering tools. We're going to get a lot more information from asking an open-ended question as opposed to asking a close-ended question. And additionally, when we ask these close-ended questions, they stop the conversation. And it also becomes difficult to build meaningful engagement and connection if we're just doing this stop, start, yes, no, whereas open-ended questions just, allow us that more conversational style, allow that we're actually interested in the person, we're trying to know more about them. And sometimes it is important to recognize that we do need to use close-ended questions, things like gathering demographic information, or if you have specific information that your practice or organization requires you to get, sometimes we have to ask a yes or no question, and that's always okay. But when we're trying to build engagement and we're working within the spirit of MI, we really want to be focusing on using open-ended questions as much as we can. And that's the difference of asking someone, were you sad this weekend? Or what were you feeling this weekend? We're going after the same kind of information, but when we ask it in an open-ended way, it just gives the opportunity for the client to express more, to give us more information, and also it might help us capture information we weren't anticipating on getting. If we close-ended question, we're looking for something very specific, but that open-endedness gives the opportunity to learn things we may not have thought to look for. And then moving on to affirmations. Affirmations are a specific type of skill where we are looking to recognize specific strengths, progress, and efforts of our clients or patients. And these are not statements that are the same as cheerleading or vague statements. We're not just saying, good job, well done, you can do it. We're really trying to highlight these specific strengths, these progress, these efforts. And that might sound like, I appreciate that you were willing to meet with me today. You are clearly a very resourceful person. You handled yourself really well in that situation. That's a good suggestion. If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could have managed nearly so well. I enjoyed talking with you today. And again, when people bring things up, we highlighting strengths, highlighting skills, that gives a lot of empowerment, that shows connection, that shows we're caring. I think we do want to avoid just saying, good job, well done, you can do it. Statements like those, especially when used repeatedly, can feel very inauthentic. They can and come off as just that we're not really listening. We're just kind of placating the people we're talking with. We're going to move on to reflections, and this is going to kind of be in MI the major tool, the major oar that we're going to be working with. And we've talked a little bit about open-ended questions and affirmations already, And so I'm just curious, when I say reflections, what comes to mind for people? What do they think of as being a reflection?
Summarizing what they've stated.
Yeah, that's a very specific kind of reflection that we'll talk about in a little bit as well.
I'd say repeating for confirmation.
Yes, that I really liked the word you said there, repeating for confirmation, and I'm going to transition that into our next slide. So reflections are statements that track a patient communication. Every time a patient or a client makes a statement, we make an assumption about what they mean. There's no way for us inherently to know that we correctly understood what they meant, or that we are accurate in our response to that. And so reflections give us an opportunity to check that we fully understand them. And if we are correct in understanding, that builds engagement, that moves the conversation forward. And if we're incorrect in understanding what the patient means, they now have an opportunity to correct us, to make sure that we are understanding them. And again, to continue to promote conversation. And that's really why reflections are such a valuable statement, is that they promote conversation and they invite continuation. Even with open-ended questions that are more natural and bring forward more answers, there is still this sort of stop-start nature to a question. Whereas when we make a reflection, it feels conversational. It promotes moving forward in the conversation. And we can use it in a variety of different ways throughout conversation. And this is a really effective tool as we get into the more technical aspects for generating change talk as well. And so kind of as a summary, what reflections do: they ensure understanding, they communicate that we're interested, they communicate acceptance and empathy, they facilitate patient speech, and they facilitate patient exploration and self-reflection. And I think a fellow trainer of mine gave a beautiful statement that I really want to share with you, that you can think of your reflection as a single flower and hold on to the idea. And at the end of a conversation, at the end of that you're having with a patient, you should have a bouquet. I really like the way of thinking about reflections. Each statement in itself does a lot, but they build and build and build on each other. And so reflections, again, kind of moving forward, these are statements that a way of communicating that many of us don't naturally experience or use in our day-to-day lives. So I just want to talk a little bit about how we form reflections. So reflections are kind of close to the question format. A reflection is making a guess about speaker meaning, but it does not have to be in the question format. So essentially it's a statement versus a question. And we can really turn any question into a statement, into a reflection, by turning our inflection down at the end of our sentence. So instead of saying, are you worried about your kids? You could say, you're worried about your kids. And just, changing that inflection moves us from a question to a statement. And then that simple act, even though we're essentially the sentence structure is the same, can change so much within the conversation. And so, yeah, again, you say things like, you're thinking about getting a divorce, or you're thinking about getting a divorce. The only thing that's changing between those two statements is just how I'm inflecting that final word, and that itself can have generate so many different responses from the client or patient who we are talking to. And
I don't have a hand up thing on my app for some reason. My mom always told me, even though I had the best intentions in what I was saying, she always came back with, it's not what you say, Bonnie, it's the way you say it.
Yes.
So anything we say can come out as a judgmental statement, or it can come out as a kind, empathetic statement. So it's really about learning to speak in a way that the person understands, instead of sounding so judgmental in the same sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really a beautiful statement, and reflections, they really enable us to show that we are making an effort to understand, to show that we want to know what you're trying to communicate to us. And there are many different ways that we can reflect, and some people brought this up initially, there's a few different levels of reflection. We can simply repeat what someone has said, say it back to them. We can rephrase, where similarly we're saying it back to them, but we're adding in some synonyms. We can paraphrase, where we infer a specific meaning about what they said. We can reflect the affect of what they said, so we're looking at the emotional dimension of what they're saying. We can also reflect their values, highlighting specific things of importance. And then finally, we can reflect ambivalence, state both sides of what someone is saying. On one hand, it sounds like you've been really struggling with quitting smoking, but on the other, you recognize that you really need to make a change. And so we can break these levels of reflection into two kinds of reflections: simple reflections and complex reflections. And when we're having a conversation with someone, we kind of want to have this goal of trying to achieve a 2-to-1 ratio of complex to simple reflections. So for every simple reflection we give, we want to try and do at least 2 complex reflections. And so I kind of want to get us into the idea of practicing reflections, what it feels like to give reflections. So we're going to try and do a group exercise, and you can write this down on your own if you want, but also be asking for examples from the group. So I'm going to be putting up some sentence stems, and then I want us to try and generate some reflections to those sentences. So as an example, you could say, I intend to go straight home after school, but in the moment it's hard. And here are some examples of what different reflections could be. Simple reflection, just restating it. You intend to go right home after school, but in the moment it's hard. Or more complex reflection, paraphrasing, you're looking for a better strategy, reflecting the value, focusing on school is really important to you. Or even reflecting ambivalence, you might want to focus on your priorities, and sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the moment. So yeah, I'm going to put up some blank sentence stems, and feel free to write examples down for each of these on your own, but we're going to try and get at least a couple examples from the group as we go through these. And so this first one, I can't live like this anymore. What are some ways we could reflect that?
You're having a hard time in life.
Yeah, good rephrasing. Can anyone think of a complex reflection we could give to this?
Maybe it sounds like you're struggling with not knowing what to do next.
Yeah. It sounds like you're struggling. There's an emotion in there that they maybe didn't tell us, but that we're picking up on, that we're hearing. That's really good. Let's try another one. I never feel more alive than when I'm using.
It's important for you to feel alive.
It's important for you to feel alive. So yeah, again, trying to pull out the affect of that. Any other ideas or reflections?
Something like, when you're using, it makes it easier for you to deal with your circumstance.
Yeah, I think a statement like that, you're pulling out a lot of meaning in what they said. Yeah, and again,
you struggle feeling more alive.
Yes, yeah. Again, just because
you're having a hard time feeling alive without an external force.
Yeah, and so yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can interpret it and give back to the person to show that we're understanding, to show that we're engaging, and then all these things will end up generating more conversation. Another one, I've quit using for months before.
So you've been unsuccessful in the past for long term, but you're able to continue this short term. So how can we get you to a long term?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. There, you started with a reflection and then you transitioned into a question. And so with MI, what can be really effective is very often we'll have those questions come up. But when we make a reflection, letting that stand on its own and seeing how patients respond, and then asking a question separately if we need to. But yeah, I think the reflection itself is really good.
I would suggest saying something like, wow, you really know how to gain control of a situation in your life, is what I hear you say.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, recognizing they've been successful before in the past. They know how to do this. And at the same time, going back to that spirit of MI, that statement really shows the autonomy that they have as a client. You know, showing that you can do this. No, really good.
Or you might say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about when you were able to quit using for months, just to get more information.
Yeah, that's a good way to gather more information. You know, another useful tool of using questions like that. And then, so yeah. Yeah, another statement, taking my meds just reminds me that I'm sick.
You sound sad.
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say that again?
You sound sad.
You sound
about
sad.
taking meds.
Yeah. No, yeah. Our reflect, you know, sometimes it can be, we don't have to try and pull out super complex meanings. Sometimes there's a core feeling at the emotion at a statement, and we can just bring that forward.
You don't like feeling sick.
Yeah, you don't like feeling sick. Yeah.
Yeah, but immediately they're going to be sicker if they're not taking their medication. So it's like,
Well, yeah.
how do you come at that?
Exactly. That's that writing reflex coming up.
Right.
You know, we know, you know, as professionals that if you don't do this, it's going to be worse from you. And so how in this part of MI, we can hear a statement like that, you know, not jumping straight to making it right or correcting it, but being with the person, being empathetic and reflecting kind of that emotion, you know, like you don't like being sick. You know,
this might be a good place to reflect ambivalence.
Yes.
You know, on the one hand, I hear you saying you don't like taking pills, and on the other hand, maybe that's what's helping you to not feel sick. And then just listen to what they say.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent reflection. And, you know, at this stage, we're really just focusing on building engagement, building, you know, a collaboration with the person we're talking to. And I think that's an excellent way to show that we're hearing them, we're understanding what they're saying. And yeah, really wonderful. And you know, previous question of like, well, they need to take their meds. How do we get that? We'll talk about the mechanisms of change here in a little bit. Timothy, I saw you raised your hand.
How can, with regard, I hear you tell me taking meds makes you feel sick. Let me ask you this. Can you tell me about your other friends and peers who take meds, and how is that helping them? Is that making them feel sick? Or what does it look like when they take their meds in the same instance?
Yeah. So again, a really excellent reflection at the beginning, and then that gives us an opportunity to transition more into questions, ways we can get information. And I think what is effective about reflection is that we can make that initial reflection, see what information they give us. They might answer some of those questions that you brought up. And then if we're still having questions, then we can bring in those additional questions. But really excellent. I think we'll just do one more. I wish people would just treat me with a little respect.
So you're feeling disrespected. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it sounds like you're feeling disrespected. Yeah. Really excellent. Anything else?
Well, if you wouldn't act a fool, no, I'm just kidding.
It's important to you to feel respected by your friends.
Yes, pulling out that value. It's important for you.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated all the reflections and kind of the conversation that's come from this. And if anyone is worried about how to think of a reflection or generated, if you are unsure how to phrase something as a reflection, you can always just say, it sounds like. That's a really good way to just start a reflection. And as you practice and get more comfortable with the idea of making reflections, you can find different ways to rephrase and give reflections to clients. But just if it is something that feels a little bit uncomfortable, that statement, it sounds like it's going to be really helpful. And I want to give us an opportunity to practice making reflections. So we're going to go into small groups again, based on the number of people here. Again, it'll probably be, some groups may have 2, some groups may have 3 or 4. Every group should hopefully have at least 3 people though. And so again, identify a speaker, an interviewer, and in this case, an observer. And if you have more than 3 people, if you have 4 people,
Which I have
2
changed as a
observers.
person.
And so the speaker, again, will choose a topic to talk about for 5 minutes. Here are some good examples to get this conversation going. Ways in which I have changed as a person over the years, what I hope and plan to do over the next 10 years, how I came to do the kind of work I am doing, and an experience I had that could be difficult for someone else to understand. Pick one of these to have a conversation about. And then so the goal of the interviewer is to respond primarily with reflective statements. And for this exercise, try and limit yourself to only asking 2 questions. I know a lot of people, when you made a reflection, you had this natural urge to bring in questions. See if you can only have this conversation with just reflections. And then the observer, their role is to take notes of complex and simple reflections that they may be hearing. So are there any questions about this exercise? Great, we will get you sent to your breakout rooms. But yeah, so it looks like we've got just about everyone back. Starting with the speakers, how was that conversation for you?
It was a little uncomfortable. I probably didn't choose the best topic, but I ran with it.
Yeah. How did it easy. Felt easy as a speaker?
Very easy for me. My partner was a good listener.
Yeah. How did those reflective statements feel? Did you find yourself giving more conversation, or did you feel like helpful to the conversation?
I felt like he clarified it. He was able to say it in a way that I was unable to articulate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo that too, because my Paul, wherever you are, a shout out to my boy Paul here. He did some Jedi mind trick on me that I didn't even see and completely rerouted. I was like, I see what you did there, sir. So that was pretty cool. That was really powerful. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. So it sounds like for the speakers that broadly, having these reflective statements really helps the conversation. As an interviewer, how was that for you? Was it difficult to only use reflections? Did you feel yourself wanting to jump back into questions?
For me, it was a little bit difficult at first. Sometimes it's difficult to just tell them to stop or not tell them, just find a way or a place to get into the conversation and just encourage them. Because when they're speaking, you don't want to cut them, like tell them, stop, it's my turn. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually a skill we'll talk about a little bit later on. Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult to get into the conversation as a listener. Nikki, you raised your hand.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that with my group. And one thing I wanted to point out is that my partner, Bev, who did a great job, she didn't always like jump into something. I mean, she took like, a couple of seconds. And then when she responded, it was like, okay, yeah, you thought about that. It was just validating and made me want to talk more.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important, what you highlighted is it's always okay to take some time. You don't have to immediately know what to say. Sometimes people give us very complex statements, or they may not give us a lot of information in their statement. And it's okay to take a couple of seconds to work out what we're going to say, because when we're able to come up with a good reflection, it doesn't matter how long we took to make it if we're showing accurate empathy, if we're showing that we're making an effort to engage. So yeah, I'm glad that you had that experience where that silence turn into something a little helpful. Any other comments from the interviewers before we get into observers?
Yeah, I think for me, the speaker was, she had it seemed very complex. So I had to do a lot of thinking, I guess, in order to respond in the most appropriate way.
Yeah. Was it difficult? Were you wanting to go into asking questions?
Right.
Where some of that thinking had to come in, that you had to think of the reflections?
Yes, I had it in the beginning of my mind that I shouldn't be asking questions right now. I need to kind of listen to what she had to say, and I tried to do my best.
Yeah, and so this is kind of what this exercise is getting at, is starting to train this new way of thinking, that reflections aren't necessarily the way we all communicate with each other. And so while it's okay to ask questions, and MI has a context for using questions, how can we shift our mind towards using more of these reflections? And then I want to go to the observers. What did you notice in terms of the amount of complex and simple reflections? Was it weighted any which way?
In our group, it seemed that it came naturally for the not the speaker, but the
interviewer.
The interviewer, yes. She did a really good job. It just flowed.
Yeah.
And I found that to be, I could see how it could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing you noticed, is kind of what I said earlier. Reflections, they promote conversation. They help keep this flow to the conversation a really nice back and forth. And whereas questions, while helpful, they do create a pause. And so using reflections can help us maintain that flow within the conversation. Thank you. Kind of moving out of reflections into our final ORs, to the S of ORs, summaries. Summaries, these are special applications of reflective listening. They can be used throughout a conversation, but they are particularly helpful at transition points. For example, after a person has spoken about a particular topic, has recounted a personal experience, or when an encounter is nearing an end. Really, it's just a tool that can help us transition from topic to topic. It gives us an opportunity to organize all the content that's been discussed. And it provides, as we talked about our flower metaphor earlier, a bouquet at the end of the session, bringing together all the different things we talked about, all those different statements we made, and presenting them back to the client. So yeah, summaries, really effective tool for those kind of transitional elements wherever they may occur. And it can even be a tool you'll want to use if a lot has been discussed in a really short amount of time, and just kind of what was important in this conversation, presenting that back to the client so that they can let you know what they think was important. And what really this ends up just looking like is an extended reflection, statements that sound like, we've talked about a few different things in the last 20 minutes. I just want to make sure that I'm hearing everything you were talking about. You mentioned some struggles with quitting in the past, and you also talked about some of the efforts you've made recently to try and get back into quitting. So yeah, just these longer statements that are kind of reflecting broader conversation rather than specific statements. And so what all of these ORs encompass are good relational listening skills. And in that engagement portion of MI, where we are learning about the client, gathering information about them, understanding what they need, where they're wanting to go, we move forward with our ORs. Open-ended questions, they give us more information. They leave patient in the driver's seat, allow them to say what they think is important. Affirmations allow us to point out specific strengths, attributes, efforts, and actions. And again, this is not just cheerleading. We're being very specific in these reflections. We can reflect ambivalence, values, affect, and it allows us to check our understanding, make sure that we are properly communicating and understanding what the patient is going through. And summaries, they give a summary to patient perspective, thoughts, ideas, preferences, and give us an opportunity to ask, did I miss anything? Is there anything else you want to talk about? And so once we've built that engagement, we're able to move into the next aspect of motivation interviewing, which is focusing, this next process. And this is where we seek and maintain direction in an encounter. And for the therapeutic alliance to be developed and sustained, the facilitator also needs to facilitate a shared sense of focus and purpose. In some settings like research or medical settings, there is a clear established focus, but sometimes we need help to determine what that focus is. And again, you know, this is not occurring, this stage of focusing is not occurring in a vacuum. This is building on all that engagement we used before, and we're continuing to use those ORS skills to clarify what the focus should be, what's important for us to focus on, and all that sorts of things. So yeah, the process of focusing is becoming clear about the goals and directions of the session. We spend some time engaging, and then we need to figure out, what are we going to talk about today? What are the goals for today? And ideally, this is a shared sense of direction. Kind of stepping back into how we talked about the spirit of MI. Again, we are coming as a collaborator, not an expert. We want this to be a shared decision, not something that we are fully imposing on the client, of saying, this is where we're going to go, but it's saying, where do we want to go? What's important for us to talk about today? And essentially, this is a meta conversation about the conversation we're going to have. And again, like a lot of the things we're talking about, focusing as a process is not unique to MI, but the way we're going about focusing is MI adherent. And so there are many styles we could follow when doing focusing. There is the following style, and that goes all the way up to a directing style, and in the middle there's a guiding style. And different modalities will have different ways of focusing their sessions. For example, in person-centered therapy, that relies on this following style, where the clinician follows the patient wherever they want to go. They're listening, they're going along. The patient is in full control. And then there's the directing style. A modality like CBT would be a good example of that, where the provider is establishing, here are the behaviors I think we need to correct, the thoughts that need to be corrected. They're telling the patient where they're going to go. And MI sits in this guiding style, where we're really trying to balancing these two things, following and directing. We want to be collaborative in how we're agenda setting and keeping things on topic. And if we are ever stepping into following or directing, it's not MI consistent. And so, you know, remembering the spirit of MI, you know, how we embody those things when you're trying to establish a focus, that's how the process of focusing is MI consistent. And so we are still focusing on a target behavior. And for MI, we want to establish what unhelpful and unhealthy behaviors are. And these should not be generic or vague statements. You know, if clients are saying things like, I want to be a better person, we want to try and get somewhere specific. Like, I want to work on how I manage my stress. And so for the purposes of MI, the target behavior should be an unhelpful behavior which the patient would like to change, but has not been able to change. So again, bringing in this idea of ambivalence. If the issue at hand isn't focused on this issue of ambivalence, MI might not be the best choice for that conversation. And so how do we do focusing MI? We want to keep discussion centered on the target behavior. Again, we really want this to be collaborative, shared goals, shared decision-making. And again, sometimes there is a clear direction. If we're working in an addiction clinic, we're probably going to be talking about addiction. But sometimes we might have unclear direction, or there might be multiple focuses we can talk about. And so through a collaborative process, we want to establish that. And so I'm going to go through some different strategies we can use to focus. Here they're all laid out. You know, we can use open-ended questions, we can use structuring statements, ask permission, start with strengths, agenda mapping, refocusing. And so we're going to discuss these strategies, and often focusing can be a very simple process, but I just want to make sure that there's a variety of tools that you can turn to if you feel that you need them. So first, open-ended questions for focusing. Just asking, what are your main goals for today? What can I help you with? What are your concerns for today? And so this is, you know, we're treating the client as an equal partner, and at all times we are respecting client autonomy. It's for the client to determine what they would like to address or work towards in treatment. We can also use structuring statements, and these help us do things like organize the time, set expectations for the session. They may explain our role in helping. They may explain what is being discussed, what could happen. We can also use these to transition or to refocus if things get off topic. And so, yeah, helpful role if patients are pushing against the time limits of the session or being tangential. We can say things like, I just want to be aware of our time and see if we can bring the conversation back to your smoking habits. Yeah, or another example might be, I want to make sure we can address all of your concerns during our time together. Or you mentioned X, Y, and Z. Can we focus on that for a few minutes? And also there's some general statements that I think are helpful for setting expectations for the conversations. Things like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I can guide our conversation about this, but you know what's best for you. Would you mind if we talk for a moment about the topics we might discuss today? Those are all things that I think really fit within that spirit of MI, and at the beginning of a session can give us an opportunity to really set up our expectations with the client. Another tool is we can ask for permission. Again, this is part of collaborative agenda setting. It demonstrates respect for patient autonomy. These are especially helpful if the patient is low readiness or hesitant about a topic. For example, discussing vaccines with a parent who is vaccine hesitant. It should, and again, when is it appropriate to ask for permission? Because it's optional to discuss, you can still be collaborative. We're in this process acknowledging the autonomy and preferences about the topic, acknowledge their thoughts about the topic. And so that could come out as a statement like, part of my job is to discuss X, Y, and Z with you, but I also want to know what you think about this or how this fits into your life. So if we apply that to a parent who's vaccine hesitant, part of my job as doctors to discuss vaccines with you. But I also want to know how vaccines fit into your life. What do you think about getting vaccinated? Just gives an option to, again, explore this process a little bit more and to help the client, give the client an opportunity to tell us what concerns they may have, what issues they have, and give us direction in the rest of the conversation. Some other helpful statements for asking permission. Can we spend a few minutes talking about? Is it all right with you? I'd like to discuss. I have concerns about X that I need to share with you. And then next, starting with strengths. So we can start focusing the conversation by initially asking, what does the patient already know? What have they heard? What do they think about? Have they had any experience with this? And so we really want to come in with an attitude that we are not starting with a blank slate. The patient already likely has a perspective and some information about whatever topic we're going to be talking about. And we want to bring their perspective into the discussion, showing that they are in many ways an expert on themselves, that they have helpful information. Why might this be a helpful way to start a discussion? I'm curious about if people have any thoughts about this particular method.
It empowers them.
Yeah. You're able to make them feel that their perspective matters.
It's client-centered.
Yes, yeah. We're recognizing the autonomy of the client, their internal expertise, not just assuming that we know more than them. Yeah, those are some really good reasons that this is helpful. Some other things I just want to bring in is this saves us time. It's helpful to not explain something to someone that they might already know. It engages them in the conversation, making them feel like their perspective, again, is valued and empowered. And then it also sets the tone for this session. It's a good way to show that we are not coming into this conversation as an expert, but as a collaborator. That could come out of statements is, what have you already been doing to manage your diabetes? What do you already know about how alcohol affects your body? When you think about quitting smoking, what have you considered trying? What have you already tried, or what do you already know about how people manage their anxiety? There are many ways we can start with strengths, ask these statements. Next, we're going to talk about agenda mapping. Very often, patients or clients can come in with multiple health concerns. And sometimes it's very obvious what the main concern is, and sometimes it's not. And agenda mapping helps us focus the target behavior to the most salient, pressing, or concerning issues for the patient. And this can be done verbally, but a really helpful way is to do this with a chart. And oops, yeah, and so the process of agenda mapping is collaborative with the patient, and it structures your time together in a very clear way. And this can also be really helpful for cutting through the chit chat and stopping non-related tangents that a patient might offer, being able to come back to, okay, well, we've talked about a few things already. How can we set what is most important? And a quick example of what that might look like, this is something that you can tailor to a way that is most effective for you. A common method would be what we'd call bubble mapping, where we've generated a list of things that are concerns, and then we can put them into their own separate bubbles. And then from there, we can engage in a conversation. Okay, we've laid out some of your concerns. These are all the things that are stressing you out right now. What in these do you feel is a priority for you? Or are any of these more concerning? And that's a process I'd like us to explore a little bit more in trying to practice this. So we're going to send you back to breakout rooms. Again, there'll be a speaker and interviewer, and then 1 or 2 observers, just because of the limitations of the amount of breakout rooms we can create. So if you end up in a group with 3 or 4 people, figure out who's going to be the observers. If there's someone who hasn't had an opportunity to be a speaker or interviewer yet, try and give them priority. And so the goal of this exercise, the speaker will spend a couple minutes writing a list of their 6-month priorities. The goal is to aim for at least 3 priorities you want to accomplish in the next 6 months. Then the interviewer will use their OR skills to interview the speaker about the priorities. And the focus is going to be on clarifying goals. We're not trying to evoke change or make plans. We just want to figure out what the goals are over the next 6 months, how we can prioritize. And when the list seems complete, the interviewer will review and again use ORs to interview the speaker about the relative importance of each goal. Is there an order of priority? Which is/are more important? And again, I want this to be another example where you're really focusing on using those ORs skills. So open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summaries. And we will take 8 minutes for this exercise, a couple minutes to get your thoughts together, and then 4 or 5 minutes to have this conversation. And we will take a short break when we return from this, after we debrief from this. It looks like just about everyone is back in the room. And so, yeah, kind of what were people's experiences? How did it feel to keep using those OR skills? Did it feel helpful in, establishing your goals moving forward? What are people's thoughts?
I feel that our group, I had 2 individuals that had children in school, and they were working on their goals, and positive encouragement is what I used. So I thought they were good speakers, both of them. So that kind of like made me utilize the motivational skills that we've obtained in the 2 hours that we've had. And I feel good about it.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you're already noticing a shift in thinking, shift in how we can approach these conversations. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I feel that motivational interviewing is positive encouragement at the same time with your clients. So that way they can look at their goals.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, we really want to bring forth people's own ideas, their own motivations, their own goals. Yeah. Just in the interest of time, I think, we've got about 50 minutes left. So just want to give everyone one last chance to take a break, stretch, get water, go to the bathroom if need, before we go for the last hour or so. So if everyone could be back at 11:42, that would be great. Okay, some people might still be coming back to us a little bit, but we'll start by getting back into it. This is going to be the last little stretch of the training. And to finishing out this section on focusing, we're next going to talk about refocusing. Sometimes the discussion gets off track from the target behaviors. And this can happen for many reasons. Maybe the patient has a lot going on, a lot to say, but we're always going to have a limited amount of time to discuss whatever we need to talk about. And so how do we interrupt patient speech to bring the session back on track? There's a few different strategies I'd like to give you to do this. And these each depend on the situation, the patient you're working with, the kind of rapport you have with them. And again, in some cases where focus is more clear, it's often built up, it can be a bit more straightforward to keep the session on track. But in a lot of cases, where there's not as much built-in structure, we may need to use some of these statements to help get us back in. So the first one is apologize for interrupting. A lot of times we can feel, I know I personally feel uncomfortable interrupting a patient, cutting them off, but sometimes it's just what we have to do. And usually if you come in with an apology, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I would like us to be able to get back to some of the concerns you came in with. Most people are going to be incredibly understanding and just be able to, oh, apologies, and you're able to get back into that. So even though it feels uncomfortable, never be afraid to just jump in with an interruption. If we find a pause, we can also use structuring statements and just, this is an opportunity for us to be transparent with patients and say, I'm noticing the time and I want to make sure we're able to get to everything today. We can validate that this is for and about the patient. This might sound like, I want to make sure you get everything you need, everything you needed out of our time together. So are we able to move on to, and then this is really big, especially when in person, and especially if you feel uncomfortable with interrupting, we can use nonverbals. Often if the patient is very verbal and they're talking a lot and we're finding it hard to get in, just simply using our body language, simply leaning forward or holding out a hand, we cue into those visual cues and people respond to that and they say, oh, they see that you're trying to jump in. It gives you an opportunity to pause the conversation. And then finally, we can use summaries to refocus, as if we've talked about a lot, kind of we mentioned earlier, we've talked about X and Y and Z today. Regarding next steps, what do you want to do? And so I turn it back to the group. How do you think you would go about getting comfortable with the idea of interrupting?
This is definitely an area that I can improve. I'm a primary care provider, and some of the things that I think this would be helpful for are having a little bit more goal-directed visits or a little bit more concise visits, helping me run more on time. And it can be really, really hard to maintain good empathy. Yes. And also be able to cut somebody off and create structure that way. So it's a real challenge for me. So I appreciate this part of the talk today. I don't have anything to add. This is an area I really am working on growth. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comment, just kind of recognizing, this is a very difficult thing to do. I think it's fairly common to feel uncomfortable interrupting people. At the end of the day, it has benefits not just for us, but also for the patients or the clients who we're working with. And just, in your response to your comment about it's scary to try and maintain that empathy, this is where, the spirit of MI really comes back into focusing. If we do have to interrupt someone, if we do have to refocus and we're worried about that, remembering that we're staying within this spirit, that we are being with our patients in a compassionate way, as a partner, not as an expert, and showing that we're understanding and being, honest with them about why we need to interrupt, people are very responsive. It doesn't damage rapport or engagement as much as you might fear it will if you're staying within the spirit of MI. And so,
I think a lot of this again depends on our tone of voice and our approach with the patient. If it's a gentle interruption, because this is so critical to us staying focused on the things that are going to help the patient the most. And it is also so critical to understanding where there might still be misunderstanding or lack of knowledge. It's very important in terms of educating the patient, especially if there's a cultural difference, a language barrier, or a cognitive issue. So we are really doing this in their favor by focusing.
Yes.
We're helping them tremendously.
Yeah, I really like that statement, you know. Yeah, we're not the ones who are trying to get something out of this conversation, and being able to bring that focus back, make sure that we're being productive in our conversation is going to just benefit the client. I believe I saw that Andrew raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to say too that that's kind of one of the things that I use in my groups is, you know, you got to learn your crowd first of all. And, you know, I do a lot of work in the Santa Fe Recovery Center, and it's really fun too for them because I use humor. Like I'm big time using humor with interrupting. Like I'm very good at interrupting, but I also bring it back on me. Because I'll just be like, hey, okay, let's bring it back, guys. Let's calm down. Look, you guys got me to squirrel off. I get it. Look, I did a lot of drugs too when I was younger. Okay, let's do this. Let's focus, okay? And it kind of brings myself down to their level too, so it's like they're understanding, like, he's one of us. Like we get it. And so I'm use humor. That's my biggest thing. And it was funny because we were actually in a group the other day, in training with the staff, and I was like, I don't know how to cut people off. Like I'm really good at asking questions. I was like, I don't like if they start to go off on a tangent where I can't deal with the stuff they're talking. How do I do that? And I was mid-sentence, and one of my colleagues was like, I'm just going to stop you right there. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what's up? She was like, no, that's what you do. And I was like, oh, like, oh, my bad. So it's, you know, I just try to use humor and just be, you know, relate to the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really, you know, bringing levity to the situation. You know, we're not trying, again, staying within that MI spirit. We're not interrupting to come in as an expert. We're coming in as a collaborator. We're with you, and we're showing that, hey, we understand there might be more you want to talk about, but I want to make sure that we're capturing everything we need to. So yeah, I think that's another, could be a really helpful tool, is using humor. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, but once we've kind of established our focus in the conversation, what is the goal of our conversation, this is where we really get into the next process of MI, the evocative process. This is the part where we are actually bringing forth someone's motivations to change, and we are affecting that scale of ambivalence we brought up earlier. And again, evocation is building on everything we've done before. You know, we're maintaining our engagement, we're maintaining our focus, and we're continuing to use those same, our oars to keep this conversation moving. And so we bring, just quickly stepping back into this 3 essential elements we brought up earlier. MI is a particular kind of conversation about change, the focus. MI is patient-centered, the relational aspect. But we are now going to be getting into this, the third aspect of this definition, the technical aspect. MI is evocative. It seeks to call forth the person's own motivations and commitment. So this is where we step back into this idea of ambivalence. And so earlier I described that when people are ambivalent, they have reasons for making a change and reasons they want to stay the same. And we can operationalize those definitions by talking about change talk, or statements that our patients or clients make that support making a change, and sustain talk, or statements that are against the change or about maintaining the status quo. And for people who are ambivalent, we're always going to hear both sides of this coin. We're going to hear change talk and we're going to hear sustain talk. And we need to be able to recognize which kind of language we're hearing from someone, so then we can use some of the strategies we're going to talk about today to how we can cultivate and bring forth more change talk, and how we can soften the amount of sustain talk we're hearing. Because again, as people voice their own reasons for change, they become more likely to actually commit to making that change. So this part is really going to focus on what change talk sounds like and how we can bring more of it from clients. And so first, let's talk about what are the types of change talk. No one can make a behavioral change for their patients. You know, individuals make their own choices, but with the right training and practice, we can help patients become more aware of their thoughts and goals. And so to do that, we need to be able to recognize change talk when it occurs. In the world of motivational interviewing, we use this acronym DARN-CAT, or DARN-CATS. and it's used to describe the various types of change talk. And as you can see, we have darn, desire, ability, reason, and need, and then cat, commitment, activation, and taking steps. And we can break these into two groups of preparatory and mobilizing change talk. So the darn, these are when people are approaching change. You know, they're expressing a lot of reasons for why they might want to make a change, why they need to make a change. They haven't taken any steps to actually commit to making that change. And so through this evocative stage of the conversation, we want to see if we can bring forward more of these mobilizing change talk, hearing more client language about committing to making a change, activation around a change, or taking steps towards making that change. And simply just spotting a patient's change talk is not MI. That alone doesn't facilitate meaningful change. We need to be able to recognize it and then use our responses to intentionally steer the conversation towards increasingly action-oriented change talk. And that's where our ORs come in. You know, how can we respond to clients in a way that is bringing forth more ideas for them to voice more reasons to change? And so I talked about this a little bit already, but what is evocation? And this is the process in which we encourage patient to verbalize their arguments for change. And it also allows us to deepen, specify, dig into, make more real their arguments for change. And there are many, many ways to do this. This is a very creative part of MI. I'm going to show a few examples of tools here in a bit that you can use or you can use to get inspired. And again, we want to use this evocation so we can tip that scale of ambivalence towards change. And again, we know from research that a predominance of change talk in conversation predicts behavioral change versus a conversation that is high in sustained talk. So if we're continuing to just hear sustained talk from clients where they're talking about maintaining the status quo, it's very unlikely that they're going to leave that conversation and make a change. And also part of evocation involves maintaining curiosity and managing the writing reflex. So this is the part where we're wanting to bring forth people's own motivations, where we really might start feeling, oh, but I know what you need to do. I know the change you need to make. And so just, as you're engaging in MI conversations, being in tune with yourself, recognizing, what am I wanting to say here? Am I staying within this MI spirit? Am I maintaining this collaboration? And there are sometimes opportunities in MI to make suggestions. This usually comes with the client specifically asking for them, but we can talk about that in a bit later. But mainly we want to bring forth their own motivations. So components of evocation, we already talked about. Recognizing change talk. This involves learning to listen in a different way, and then trying out new change talk. Involves using our ORs and tools for evoking, and then responding to change talk when we hear it. And an important first step to practice in recognizing change talk for many people involves being very intentional and involves changing how you listen to someone. And this is something that at first can feel like a lot of work, parsing out what is change talk from sustained talk, but like a muscle, it gets easier with practice. And so talking more about that, a patient's verbalized language around change is more predictive of change than the provider's language around change directed at the patient. That is to say, again, patients hearing themselves express language is a lot more effective than us telling them why they should change. And before making a change, we often consider the pros and the cons. And so it is normal to hear sustained talk amongst change talk, and we will use our OR skills and these tools that I'll show you in a minute to bring forward more of that change talk. And very often we see what's called a change talk sandwich, where we hear change talk, sustained talk, then change talk. It's very normal for those statements to occur together. Again, people are ambivalent. They can see both sides of the argument. So I've been using since I was 15. It's always been something I did when I was stressed. I know I need to stop now, but it's going to be hard. So yeah, there's a lot we can respond to in that statement, and how we draw out responses to that is kind of what we'll talk about. But first, I want us to just hear some change talk, hear some good examples of it. So we're going to watch a video that's demonstrating an MI conversation, and I want you guys to be listening for the change talk we hear. So again, desire, ability, reason, need, commitment, activation, taking steps. And when you hear a change talk statement, write it down, take note of it, and you're looking for all 5. Just for today, let's not call out a bingo. We'll just come back to a large group and talk about some of the examples that we see. But yeah, I just want you to try and find at least 5 examples of change talk.
Watch what happens this time when the provider cues into what the parent is saying, empathizes with her situation, and attempts to work with the parent to find a solution that fits her needs.
So I wrote a prescription for antibiotics for Aiden. Okay. I did want to talk to you though. I'm a little bit concerned looking through his chart at how many ear infections he's had recently, and I noticed that you had checked the box that someone's smoking in the home. So I was wondering if you can tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's just me and him, and I do smoke. I try really hard not to smoke around him, but I've been smoking for 10 years, except when I was pregnant with him. But it's so stressful being a single mom and having a full-time job, and so that's why I started smoking again.
You have a lot of things going on, and smoking's kind of a way to relax and de-stress.
Yes, yeah. Some people have a glass of wine, I have a cigarette.
Sure. And it sounds like you're trying not to smoke around him. Why did you make that decision?
I know it's not good for him. I mean, I've read those things about ear infections and asthma and stuff, but other kids have ear infections and their parents don't smoke.
So on the one hand, you're worried about how your smoking might be affecting him, and on the other hand, you're not so sure if it's really the smoking that's causing these problems.
Right, yeah. I mean, he doesn't have asthma. He hasn't had a lot of other problems that his other friends have. So, and I've thought about quitting before in the past, but I just don't see how it's possible right now.
What made you decide to quit smoking when you were pregnant?
Well, he was inside me and we were sharing everything, and I knew that he would get some of that, and I just didn't think I could live with myself if something happened to him.
Right now, though, it feels almost too difficult to even manage or even to try.
Yeah, exactly.
How were you successful when you quit before?
I don't know. I think about it now, I don't even know how I did it. I just did it. I just couldn't imagine like him not being born or going into labor early and him having problems and stuff like that, all the stuff that they talk about with women who smoke. So that was just enough to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to risk that. So
the risks were so scary then that you're able to stop, but
yeah.
They don't feel as scary to you now.
No, I mean, we're two separate people, and like I said, I try really hard not to smoke around him. I'm pretty good about that. I don't let other people smoke around him. So
You're doing the best you can do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but it sounds to me too like part of you really does want to quit.
Yeah, I know that I need to, and I keep every new year I say, okay, this year I'm going to quit smoking, but then something happens and it just doesn't.
It's on your to-do list. It's just not making it to the top.
Yeah.
If you did decide to quit, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all confident, you don't think you could do it, and 10 is you feel pretty certain that you could, where do you think you fall right now?
Probably like a 5. Kind of in the unsure area. Like, I know I've done it before, so I know I can do it, but at the same time, it just seems really hard, and it's not the same situation.
Well, what made you say 5 rather than 2 or 3?
I know all the ways it's bad for me, and I don't want him to grow up thinking that it's okay to smoke. I don't want him to use any kind of, I don't want him to chew or anything like that. So I know I need to, especially before he gets old enough to understand what mommy's doing, but I just don't know if I can do it.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a lot of reasons why you'd like to quit. You have been successful quitting in the past, and right now you're just feeling a little bit hesitant about your ability to do it.
Yeah.
Where do you think we should go from here?
I don't know. I'd like some help. I just don't know what kind of help I need.
Sure. So. Well, if you'd be interested, that's something I can definitely talk to you about. There are a lot of new options that can actually help people be way more successful in their attempt at quitting. There's different medications you can try.
I don't like medicine.
Okay. There's also a lot of support groups and classes that you can take where you have other people to go through it with you. And sometimes just having that support can be a big part of it, especially for people like you where smoking is such a stress reliever.
That sounds nice, but I'm not sure if I have the time for all that.
Sure. It feels like something that would take up a lot of time and maybe not fit into your life. I wonder if we could talk about some options that might fit into your life.
That would be really nice.
Okay, well, if you're willing, then we could set up another appointment where you could come in and we could talk more about that.
I would like that. That would be great.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so thoughts about, let's see. Thoughts about that video. What were some of the different change talks that we heard?
I like that she stated, let's look at the options.
Yeah.
Right. I think that gives it, that's wide open.
Yeah, that is. And did you notice any from the patient, any kinds of change talk, anything they expressed?
Well, I noticed she was successful in the past because she said she quit smoking when she was pregnant before. And I like the way the provider said, so the risks were enough that you wanted to then, and the risks aren't so high now. Like she kind of pointed out the fact that that's the key to quitting smoking. The risk has to be higher than the reward, right? So.
Yeah. And and the patient also demonstrated that she's had the ability to quit in the past. Thank you.
And the patient said, I just did it. When asked how, I just did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it was important that she asked for help. She accepted help.
Yeah.
You know, that's an actual motion, you know, a step to take.
Yeah, she took steps. Yeah, she said, I'm ready to accept help. It would be good if we could find some options for me.
I think another example of change talk was when the patient said, I don't want him to grow up thinking it's okay to smoke.
Yeah. That was a really important reason for her.
I think it was important too that she was the doctor in the situation was taking her circumstances into account also and saying, like, I understand that you're busy and you have other things, so maybe these meetings won't be quite the thing that'll work for you.
Yeah, the provider was doing a really good job at being consistent, you know, coming at that from that collaborative perspective, not just saying, oh, well, no, the best thing to do is to take meds. You don't want to take meds, I'm going to prescribe them anyways. But yeah, any other thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, I like what she said too, is, you know, asking the questions and like, what is realistic for you? I think that,
yeah,
you know, a lot of times, and just bringing it back to the addiction model too, you know, we always promote, you got to do your 90-90 and you got to do all this other stuff and yada, yada, yada. But we really don't really ask a lot of times, like, what's realistic for you? Like, what do you have the availability to do? You know, with the exception of being on parole or probation, those you have to do. But if you're on your own, let's work with you. Let's, you know, what is realistic? Like, don't set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing to point out. And yeah, I'm going to continue.
I like how she put it to her, you know, where do you think we should go from here?
Yes. Yeah, really giving that agency to the client, recognizing their autonomy in this situation. Like, you decide, help me decide what's best for you. And yeah, so let's kind of keep talking about change talk. So once you've recognized change talk, how do you start drawing out new change talk? These are where we're going to talk about some of the many tools we can use to start bringing things out. And so when you haven't heard change talk from a patient, or you want to start a discussion in the direction of change, there are some strategic tools we can use to evoke that talk. We're going to talk about a few today. And the first and simplest way is to just ask for it. You know, we can ask about all of the different levels of change. How would you like for things to change? If you decided to do X, Y, and Z, how would you do it? What would be some good reasons for this change? What needs to happen for you to make this change? How important is it for you to make this change? So what do you think you'll get to do to get this ball rolling? There we can, and it's always helpful to have like some back pocket questions if you ever feel stuck or you're unsure about coming up with questions in the moment. And then we can also use reflections to engage with these types of things. And reflections allow us to a bit more selectively respond and even draw more change talk. There are some kinds of questions we want to avoid. Questions like, why haven't you changed? What keeps you from doing this? And why haven't you been able to make this change? And just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of pull back a little bit on the just asking questions, just so I can make sure we can cover everything. And typically we want to avoid these types of questions because they evoke sustained talk. And we don't need to evoke sustained talk because we know that when patients voice sustained talk, it correlates with a lower likelihood of behavior change. And we know that we are probably going to hear sustained talk no matter what we do. So we don't want to seek it out. We want to try that our statements, our questions are bringing forth change talk in regards to, and really trying to, again, soften that sustained talk. And of course, this is different than, say, if you were in the planning stage and needing to explore obstacles or other difficulties the patient may be facing, which we'll discuss a little bit as well. And now we're just going to kind of go through some tools you can use. You can explore values and goals. So bring into the discussion what matters most to the patient in life, what values do they hold dearest, and then explore how that fits in with their current behavior. You know, everyone has values and goals, and once you've developed good rapport with patients, this can be a really helpful tool. And this strategy often deepens conversation and provides an opportunity to deepen the meaning of the discussion and to deepen the patient's feelings in favor of change. You know, saying things like, your family, your work, your health is really important to you. I'm curious if you could share about how your use might be impacting that. And then this can provide a reference point for where the patient wants to be versus their present situation, you know, kind of rectifying where their goals are and where their present is. Another tool is called looking back, looking forward. This can widen the sense of discrepancy between the how things are currently versus the potential for life to be better again. So looking back, what were things like before you started using drugs? What was your life back like then? And then contrasting that with how would you like for things to be different in the future? How would you like for things to be different 5 years from now? Giving people the opportunity to explore, you know, times of their life when things were more positive and helping bring forward some reasons they might want to change to get back to what was and what could be. A really powerful tool that will come up a few more times in this presentation are change rulers. This is a tool that is especially important for assessing importance and confidence. It's not as good of a tool for things like readiness, but when this tool is applicable, it's remarkable to see this tool in action. And so this is simply asking a patient, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not important, 1 being not important at all, 10 being the most important thing in the world, how important is it for you to stop using? And then it doesn't matter what number they give you. It could be a 2, a 3, a 5, a 6, a 10, whatever number they give you, we ask, why are you at, say, a 6 and not a lower number like a 4, a 3, or a 4? And so the value of the ruler lies in these follow-up questions. Another follow-up question we could ask is, what would it take for you to go from, you know, a 6 to a higher number like a 7 or an 8? And so what these follow-up questions do is they cause people to defend the number they gave and to give reasons for why the number is as high as it is. If you ask someone, okay, so you're at a 6, why are you not at an 8? Now they have to give reasons for why they're not a higher number. They have to defend their current situation, why they're not more ready to change. Whereas when we ask that lower number, they have to generate ideas for why it's as high as it is. And then that second follow-up question, what would it take for you to change your number? This is an opportunity to explore potential planning strategies the patient might have, what actions they might need to take, what ideas they already have to make this change they're thinking about. And so this is a really powerful tool. I can't understate how remarkable this tool is. And I encourage you to try using it and see what that experience is. Another tool is a roadmap. This is a way of exploring both sides of ambivalence. You know, we've set the focus, we've set the goal with the patient. We can ask them, what are some good things that might happen if you make this change? And then we explore that conversation. We use our ORs to explore those ideas. And then we contrast that with, what are some of the bad things that would happen if you don't make this change? and that, can highlight both sides of that and really generate a lot of change talk from that exploration. We use this tool in a motivational interviewing study I was a part of a few years ago, and we got some feedback that the idea of a roadmap might have some colonialist tendencies. So we reworked that into a river map. And I bring this up more specifically to show that these tools are all really versatile. Know your population, know the people you're working with, and you can really tailor them to your individual needs. For instance, this study, we were working with teenagers struggling with unprotected sex. And so we established some major themes that came up and kind of made it a more structured conversation around reasons why they might want to make a change and all the reasons that might be bad if they didn't make a change. And this is a really good structured activity, and it can really help you establish a plan as well. Next, we're going to talk about how we can respond to change talk. So we've recognized change talk when you hear it, and we want to respond in a way that encourages more change talk. This is where our ORs come back in. You use our reflections, our questions, our affirmations, and summaries to reply to change talk. So in all these tools I described above, after we present the question, we want to go back to our ORs, keep the conversation going, and explore what their answers are. And again, this is something that takes practice. And the more you practice, the easier it gets. And I would like us to be able to have some practice here a little bit more, but there is some important content that I do want to get to. So unfortunately, I'm going to cut a few exercises. If we have a little bit of extra time for the content, I would really like to come back to these. But one of the things I want to talk about today, especially, is how you can leave this training and explore more opportunities of learning, be able to practice this on your own and keep growing. So even though we're going to skip over an opportunity to practice now, I want to make sure you have information about how to practice outside of this. So we're going to skip this exercise, round robin evoking, and we're also going to skip this exercise, evoking confidence. And this would, I think if we have time, this is what we'll come back to, because this gives you an opportunity to practice that ruler, which I think is a really valuable skill. But next, I kind of want to just hit that final process of MI. So planning, and planning, this is the stage which we move to when we have gone through the evoking, we've done our engaging, we've done our focus, and we feel that the client is ready for planning. And we want to continue to be with someone while they form a plan. And when knowing when to move into planning, so we want to be looking out for sufficient engagement, a clear shared goal, and sufficient client motivation to change. These three things are not necessarily linear, and usually come up at the top of planning. And in the process of planning, it might come up that we need to revisit some or all of these different processes throughout. For example, be working with a youth and trying to evoke the reasons for change and not getting anywhere. It might be good to stop and say, I feel like I rushed us along a bit, and I want to move back to engaging and take steps to get to know them and draw more information out about them before we move back into that planning. If we're sensing some resistance, some hesitation as we get into it. So the key issues of planning are really recognizing when to start, patient readiness cues, and avoid the trap of thinking that ambivalence is gone. Ambivalence is very likely to come up again. And it can be tempting to think that when we get to the stage of planning, all the issues around motivation are over, the client is ready to commit to change, but that is false. Ambivalence is likely to come up, and so a big part of planning is assessing readiness, assessing potential obstacles, developing plans for anything that could happen. But yeah, when we feel that a patient has enough readiness, discussing a plan with them is likely to improve outcomes. However, if we try to plan before the patient is sufficiently ready, it's likely to backfire and undo previous progress. And moving to planning involves a careful judgment call based on signals and readiness from the patient. And this is just some data that shows how commitment language changes throughout an MI session. And in sessions where planning was initiated too early, client commitment language dropped off. That's the results of the study. I could talk more about it, but it's not super important. Just the results is moving to planning too early reduced commitment language. So recognizing and responding to patient readiness cues is key for successful planning. And so what these signs of readiness look like: increased change talk and shifting language. When we start noticing less preparatory change talk, reasons for change, and to more mobilizing change talk, where clients are actually talking about the hows of how they want to make the change. And so if we look at, the stages of change, some of you may have come across this before, but there's the pre-contemplation stage, the contemplation stage, and this is where we mostly are hearing this preparatory change talk, hearing the darn. And then when we start hearing CAT, the mobilizing change talk, that's when we know patients are starting to move into this realm of action, and it might be a good time to start talking about planning. So that might sound like taking steps. I didn't use 2 days last week, hearing a decrease in sustained talk. Patients start talking about envisioning the change, what that might look for them in their life, and questions about the change. What happens in the treatment program? What do I need to do? If patient readiness isn't clear, if we're unsure if it's the right time to move into planning, we check that by testing the water. And there's a few ways to do that. We can just ask patients directly if they're ready to plan. Does it make sense for us to talk about how you might go ahead quitting smoking, or is that getting ahead of things? Again, giving the patient the opportunity to respond, let us know where they're at, and maintaining that collaboration, maintaining that MI spirit. Another way we can test the water is summarize some of the more important patient statements we've heard throughout the evocation process, and end by asking a key question. Where do we go from here? Where does all of this leave you? After our discussion today, what were you thinking at this point you want to do? I think a lot of you really correctly pointed out from the video we just watched that the provider did this really well. She kind of summarized what they talked about and then asked what would be best for the patient. And if we test the water and it comes back that the patient is not ready, this is just an opportunity for us to show acceptance and start doing pre-planning if possible. We can do hypothetical planning. If you were to make this change, what would be the first step? And then also having a conversation of, well, how will you know when you're ready? And if it comes up that, again, the patient is not ready, we go back into that evocation, we go back into these processes we've been talking about. We just continue to explore these things. Again, all of these occur together. None of these occur in a vacuum in the MI process. And so when we get to the actual stage of planning, though, a really helpful way to do this is develop a change plan. And the planning process in MI is really focused around being with someone while they form a change plan that will work. And so it operates in the same way as other processes with MI. So we want to maintain our spirit, listening for and attending to change talk, moving in the direction of change, continuing to use our OARS skills, and then maintaining that collaborative spirit. And again, especially in the planning stage, avoiding that writing reflex. Really this time we're like, here's what we want to avoid, that trap of saying, well, here's what you need to do. And even though it feels like you're advocating for change, we don't want to argue for the patient. We really want them to be the one to develop their own plan. And so some tools we can use to do that. We can use our open-ended questions, personal strengths and resources. We can review past successes. The confidence ruler, I mentioned before, this is a great time to use that. And then also planning for barriers and offering collaborative suggestions. And so kind of what some of these open questions to elicit mobilizing change talk might look like. If we want to talk about commitment, are you going to do this? Do you think that you'll do it? Getting more specific, where's a good place to start? How could you do it? And it's really important to get specific. It's a lot easier to plan when you have specifics, when the goal is specifics, when the steps to take are specifics. If the plan is vague in general, it can be difficult for the client to take that out of that session and meaningfully go through that plan. Setting a date, getting buy-in. When do you think you will start? How could you start? And then getting information about activation preparing. What kind of support will you need? What are two things you could do in the next week that'll help you get closer to your goal? And again, confidence is a great thing to work with here. People will be more likely to attempt to change if they believe they are capable of changing, and evoking and strengthening confidence will really help the patient make that change. And it's important to remember, the language that the patient uses is predictive of whether or not the patient attempts to change. So if they are talking confidently, if they are giving us a lot of change talk and not a lot of sustained talk, we can feel very confident that there's a higher likelihood that they will be able to make that change. And again, this power of self-talk is really strong. And so using that ruler we talked about earlier is a really good point to bring in here. We can also go look into personal strengths and resources. What strengths do you have? What was going on before you were exercising? Who could you draw on for support? Also a good time to use affirmations, highlight the strengths of the patients, highlight the values they have in making this change. Reviewing past successes is another really helpful technique. When in the past have you made your mind to do something and did it? Think about a previous challenge. How were you successful at overcoming? How did you do it? What successes, even little ones, did you have to changing this in the past? And again, here's that confidence ruler I was talking about. I think this is such an incredible tool. And I would really encourage people to use this. And then also planning for barriers, exploring barriers as appropriate. We want to be able to anticipate potential problems, anticipate where ambivalence could come back up, where sustained talk could come back up, and being able to address those with the client while we're having a conversation with them, and working through that and having a plan is going to be really helpful if they do experience them. Though when we're talking about barriers, asking for barriers is essentially asking for sustained talk. And so it's important to follow up pretty immediately how we can address the barriers so we're not ending a conversation focused on that sustained talk. And we can also offer suggestions collaboratively. If clients are having difficult coming up with steps they might take or potential solutions, we can rely on a kind of that expert role and still in a collaborative manner provide information, saying things like, many people find it helpful to go to group therapy as part of their recovery. What do you think about that option? So even in providing resources, we're still getting the client's input. We're still seeing what they think about it. Versus saying something like, I recommend you go to group therapy to help with your recovery. And so we can give information, we can provide resources in a way that is MI consistent. And planning also comes with how we end our MI session. This is, again, another opportunity to summarize, bring up all the most important elements of our conversation, highlighting specific change talk we heard, the plan, including things, strengths and resources. We really wanted this to be cohesive and unified, like an orchid as opposed to a dandelion, which can blow apart. We really want to make sure that clients are leaving conversations with us with a direction. And it's important to note that you might not get to the planning process in a single session of MI. And so just making sure that, again, we're ending regardless with a summary, highlighting the change talk, make sure we're not bringing forth sustained talk right at the end. And we can also end with a question. Is this what you want to do? Did I leave anything else? What else can I do, if anything, to support you with this? Making sure that we're continuously getting that buy-in. Again, I want to provide an additional resource as well. So this is a pretty standard manualized change plan that they might provide in MI. And again, this is something that you can take and tailor to your client population. This is a change plan that we made for the same study I talked about earlier. And I want to make sure that at the end of this, we'll send out the slides and we'll send out links to all these resources so that you have them. And in our last couple minutes, I just want to make sure that we're able to have a brief conversation about where you go from here. This was only 3 hours. This was just an introduction. There's only so much we could cover. There's only so much we could practice. So I want to make sure that everyone is leaving here today with steps they can take to continue learning, to continue developing these skills. And so the first place to go is to turn to literature. The Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers has an amazing website where they list tons of different books for MI, working MI with specific populations, specific issues. This is a huge library of resources that if you work with a really specific group and want to know how MI might be tailored to that, there hopefully is a book here. And then for a more general introduction, there is the Motivational Interviewing Helping People Change 3rd edition. This is essentially the Motivational Interviewing Handbook written by Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick, the founders of MI. It's currently in its 3rd edition. There will be, I don't have an exact date, but speaking with them recently, there will be a 4th edition coming out with some specific changes around affirmation specifically. And then the next step, I think this is a really helpful way to learn about MI, but is to start coding. And what this means is there is a manual for how to code MI conversations, and just listening to MI conversations and then coding them, hearing what is a good conversation should sound like, hearing what a bad conversation sounds like, and pointing out specific elements in those conversations is a really good way to practice how all these different skills we've talked about today are used. And then also when you are practicing MI, having your conversations be coded to see how adherent you are to the model of MI. And then finally, I would encourage people, if you're working with a team or you're working with a group where there's general interest in learning MI, establishing a learning community, a group where you come together, you practice MI, you have short conversations with each other. I would encourage people to, reach out to me if you have questions about how can I establish a learning community, how can I learn more about coding, being able to come together with like-minded learners, being able to practice and give each other structured feedback. And then again, just some more final general links of things you can access, and I will make sure that all of these are sent out and provided for you. These will include things like getting training DVDs, accessing other trainings around town or nationally, and then a lot of the resources that UNM provides as well. If anyone has any follow-up questions, additional things they want to talk about, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure that my contact information is provided as well. If there's any interest in developing more advanced trainings or things like that, definitely feel free to reach out. We're a minute over 12:30. It's been a good 3 hours. I appreciate everyone for sticking with this. I will hang out for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions or anything, but I will let you get back to your days. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.